Everyone is born with the ability to squat, but what if you can't? Today I'm going to share with you a 4-step mobility and strength method to help you master the squat. We all know squats are a great exercise to keep the hips strong and for organ health, but having a good squat also correlates to performance like improved sprint speed, greater post-exercise acute hormonal responses, and a full depth squat is even linked to improved jump performance. The benefits seem too good to miss out on, but for so many it feels awkward when doing them, or even just feels bad and uncomfortable and painful afterwards. So what can we do to fix that? For a full depth squat, we need adequate ankle dorsiflexion, knee flexion, hip flexion, and hip rotation. So number 1 is ankle dorsiflexion. We need adequate ankle dorsiflexion to allow our knees to go over our toes when we're going into a deep squat. A lot of us have heard this and have been told from older study that this isn't good for your knees. But avoiding this just displaces the force into your back and also doesn't address the fact that your body can actually adapt to this force gradually, thereby not actually being an issue for the knees. Of course, if you do have any pain, please investigate, but there's no need to be inherently afraid of the knees passing the toes, because you actually do need this function day to day, for example, for stairs, any normal functional movement, and of course, squats. If you're not sure if you have adequate ankle dorsiflexion, one of the major telltale signs is if you feel like you're falling backwards or are actually falling backwards in a body weight squat. So if you already do have adequate ankle dorsiflexion, fine, you don't need to do any of these exercises probably. But if you don't have it and you don't know what to do about it, then I'm going to show you some weighted stretches and isometric strengthening exercises to help you gradually improve your ankle dorsiflexion. All right, so first we're going to be doing ankle dorsiflexion rocking. You can do this body weight only, using just your arm and your chest to sort of push into your leg and making sure that your heel is remaining on the floor. If that feels doable, we're going to do like 10 to 20 reps rocking back and forward. If that feels fine, you can actually add a weight on the top of your knee. This looks brutal, but it's fine. Just increases the stretch. And slowly rock back and forward for another 10 to 20 reps. But I'm aware that not everyone is even able to get to the floor. So if that's the case for you, I would recommend doing this standing up in front of some kind of bench, table, or setup where you can lean forward, and I'll show you that now. So obviously you could do this with or without a weight, or whatever's comfortable, just making sure that you're maintaining that heel on the ground so you're getting that proper stretch on the back. And if you're getting any kind of pinching at the front, I'm just going to show you a quick release technique for that. So I'm just attaching a band behind me with something heavy enough to make sure it doesn't end up pinging back onto me. I'm bringing this band right in that crease of the ankle, so we're aiming to actually push the talus back. You might want to go for a bit of a heavier band than this, and we're rocking forwards and back as the band is pulling you back the way. So the ankle dorsiflexion rocking, I would do about 20 reps 2 times before moving on to ankle dorsiflexion pails and rails, which you can do on the floor or on a raised surface like I showed you before. So with ankle dorsiflexion pails and rails, you can actually use the weight if you want. If you're new to this, you can hold this stretch for 2 minutes. I'm going to hold it with a weight. If you are closer to the hypermobile tissue type, so you're just a little bit more bendy, you might only need 1 minute. If you feel like you are pretty stiff, you might even need 4 minutes of passive stretching before you go into the isometrics. But you want to set a timer, and then when you feel like that stretch is feeling relatively comfortable and not intense anymore, that's when you're ready to do your isometrics. So ideally you want a phone with a 10-second timer. That's going to make things a little bit easier, or you can just count. We're going to be pushing the floor away with our toes for 10 seconds, and then we're going to be pulling our toes up towards our shin, trying to get deeper into that stretch. The shin should start burning up again for 10 seconds, and we're going to do 10 seconds, 10 seconds, 10 seconds, 10 seconds, 10 seconds, 10 seconds. So you're doing 3 rounds of each. So I'll walk you through this now so it makes it more easy to understand. So our first 10 seconds pushing down. So you're pushing down into the ground. So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then pulling the toes up towards the shin. 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then immediately pushing down again. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then pulling those toes up, trying to get deeper into the stretch. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Last round. So pushing down, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And last one, pulling up, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And what you should feel is the shin should be burning up like crazy while you're pulling up, and when you're pushing down, you should feel that back of the leg starting to burn up. But if you don't feel much in the beginning, that's relatively normal when you're doing isometrics. You're not going to feel a huge amount of muscle activation at first. This could take several weeks of practice doing this 2 to 3 times a week before it starts feeling like you're getting these muscles to really react. And you can also use tapping to help. So if you're not feeling absolutely nothing and you're pushing down, you can tap the back of your leg. And when you're pulling up the toes, you can tap the front of your leg to try to get these muscles to react a little bit more. So that's our round of pails and rails on this leg. Then you'd move over to the other one and do the exact same thing again. Number 2 is working hip rotation regularly. You need your femurs to be able to rotate within the hip socket in order to get down into a deep squat. A good place to start are the 90-90 switch overs. You can do this ideally sitting up as much as you can, keeping the knees as far apart as possible and moving as slow as possible, keeping your knees at a 90-degree angle to your hips. For some, this is way too difficult to do upright, so in that case, what you'll do is you'll lean back and do the exact same thing, which will make it a touch easier. So this is basically just a dynamic warm-up. You'll be doing about 10 to 20 reps of these. Then we're going to be moving on to adding a band for some resistance. So we also want to work the muscles responsible for internal rotation of the femur and external rotation of the femur, just like we would a strength set. So you'll feel all these muscles in here activating. So we're going to be doing about 12 reps, 3 sets per leg. That's quite a bit, but if you do that twice or 3 times a week, that should start helping you grow this ability to increase that range. So I'm going to show you body weight first, and of course if you're uncomfortable in the 90-90, you can place a wedge under the front leg to reduce the difficulty of this position, and you can also lean to the side and still get the benefit of these exercises. So to begin with, for hip internal rotation, we're going to place the hands onto the ground and try to raise the heel. Don't worry if your actual heel doesn't come off the ground at all. If you actually feel the activation, that's fine. You're using the right muscles. So here I'm going to do 10 reps of bringing the heel up, followed by a 10-second isometric hold. So here I'm going to hold it as high as possible for 10 seconds at the very end. That should really burn up my hip rotation, internal rotation muscles. And then I'll take a breather and work on my external rotation before moving back to the internal rotation again. So external rotation, I'm going to be placing my weight pushing down into the heel, and the knee is coming up as high as you can from here. Of course, if you're uncomfortable, you can lean back and do it that way. But again, I'm going to do 10 reps here. And then that 10-second isometric at the end. And that's the hard part, where you're trying to stay as high as physically possible. Muscles are burning up. You're isometrically contracting. Then take a little breather and we'll do the internal rotation again and then the external rotation again. And of course we're going to do that on both legs, but once you find that easy, we're going to start using the band for added resistance. You can also use an ankle weight on your ankle and then placing the ankle weight on your knee when you're going up, but it's fairly challenging in itself just using a band. So here for the internal rotation, I'm going to be using the band to push against, to lift up, and this really significantly makes this exercise a lot harder and a lot more impossible to ignore the burning sensation in your hip rotation muscles. And same thing for the external rotation. Okay, so the complicated thing is you just have to figure out what side you're going where. So here, it's the other leg you're going to need to work. If the band is on that side, then you're just simply going to have to do the opposite way around with the other leg.
So what we would usually do is about 10 reps with a 5-second isometric on the last rep, and we'll do that for 2 rounds per each leg. If you do find this uncomfortable to get into the right position, you can use a yoga block under the front leg to reduce the angle of the hip external rotation.
Number 3 is accumulating time in the squat, whether that be using assistance or not. And I'm going to show you a few techniques you can use for that. One of the ways would be using a wedge. This is a split wedge, so I can vary where my feet are going to go. And then going down into the squat where I find that comfortable and accumulating up to 2 minutes. So you could do 10 seconds several times with breaks in between, or you could work your way up to 20 or 30 seconds in a go with several breaks in between to accumulate a total of 2 minutes. So that's a small wedge. Another way to do it is on a high wedge. So for example, on a slant board. At this point, you're probably wondering, how wide should my feet be? Everyone is slightly different, and it depends on your hip socket width and depth. So actually, if you're comfortable with your feet narrow like me, that's fine. There's no problem with that. But if you find that uncomfortable and you need to go a lot wider, that's fine as well. So what you'll notice is if you do lack hip rotation, you may end up needing to have your feet out a little bit. So that's a sign that you do need to work on your hip rotation. However, it's not a big deal if your feet need to be pointed outwards for a while you're working on that hip rotation. So another method is holding on to something to help you stay upright. You can also use a weight as a counterbalance if you don't have anything to hold on to. So either something in front of you or actually physically holding it out in front to make your center of gravity move forward a bit more. If you're wondering if you should be using any of these elevations, if you're at the bottom of your squat and you are tucked under a lot with a really tight low back and that's just feeling uncomfortable for you, that's then a sign to raise your heels as high as you need to end up feeling comfortable and also having a straight back at the bottom of the squat. It's not actually a problem to have a bit of a tuck, but if that feels tight and uncomfortable, then it's a cue to change that. Now that I've shown you several ways that you can accumulate time at the bottom of the squat, I can now show you number 4, which is working on technique. Now, technique is something that often comes with people giving you cues, and I'm not a massive fan of cues because if you don't have the joint mobility to specifically do that cue, like for example, keep your heels down, it's not going to help just someone telling you to keep your heels down. You're going to actually need to work on your ankle dorsiflexion and elevate the heels in the meantime. But there's several techniques and methods I can show you now, which will basically help you learn how to do the combination of movements in sequence so you feel more comfortable actually performing a squat. So now that you know how to spend time at the bottom of the squat, the next thing is to do hovers and isometrics with weight at the bottom so that when you are loaded and when you are doing your full sequence of squatting, it's not a surprise what it feels like at the very bottom. So I'm going to use quite a high wedge. You can use a lower wedge if you want. But this is basically going to make it easier. So the higher the wedge, the easier it's going to feel. So I'm going to grab a weight that's relatively doable, easy, not too hard for me. I'm going to brace my core, push my knees out slightly so that I've got space for my arms. And I'm going to pop up for about 5 seconds. Then I'm going to rest again at the bottom. Taking a breather, do it again for another 5 seconds. Come back down, take a breather. I'm going to do one more set of 5 seconds, so I've accumulated 15 seconds. And then I'm going to pause, take a break for about 1 to 2 minutes, and then do that again. All right, so the important thing is that you know how to do a hinge. What we're going to use is a band to cue you both ways. So first of all, we're going to do the very basic hinge, which is just working from the hips, because I want you to think of basically being pulled back from the hips and allowing your body to fold down as a cue from the hips. This is more relevant for a deadlift or an RDL. So if you've already learned this, great. We're going to move on to the much harder combination of movements, which is the squat. So with the squat, you want to be thinking of unfolding as one with your hips being the hinge. So your legs and your body are moving simultaneously at the same speed, at the same rate to unfold. And we all have slightly different lever lengths, so things will always look different on different people. So it doesn't have to look exactly like me. We could have very different proportions. But to help you stay upright and hinge properly, you can use wedges still, by the way. You're going to take the band and hold it underneath your sort of armpit area. And as you hinge back, this will stop you moving too far forward with your torso, because that's very tempting to do if, say, you've learnt the hinge before in the deadlift pattern in the basic way. So here, it will help you come down with the hips and forward ever so slightly with the body as you hinge forward into that squat. So that should help a little bit with the band. And another way to help the cues stick in your head is to use a wall, because otherwise you will hit the wall if you do it wrong. So getting about 1 foot length away from the wall, that's when you can practice doing your squat and making sure that you don't basically smack your head into the wall. You can also try this with an overhead squat variation, which is much harder. So once you've mastered all those different techniques, all those different methods that I've just showed you, when you do finally go into your squat, one of the easiest ways to start is with a barbell back squat or with a goblet squat, which is much, much easier actually than a barbell squat. But what I want you to think of is tempo. So when you first go into doing your squats, instead of just going really quickly up and down without thinking about the speed, I want you to think of really slow eccentric phases. So even 4 seconds with a 1 second hold at the bottom, just like you've been practicing, and then coming back up. And that should help you really nail the technique. And if you're not sure what you're doing, then film yourself and you should be able to capture everything because of how slow it is. You should be able to feel and see where you're going wrong. So studies have actually noted the usefulness of assessing a body weight squat to find out what is going wrong, but I would actually recommend a combination of functional movement screens and joint assessments to find out what's happening. But if you can't do that, then these tips should be a good starting point. If you do want to know how to do joint assessments and functional movement screens, as well as learning mobility methods and how to program, that's all done on our CPD mobility certification, and I'll add a link below in the description so you can read about that. So I hope you found these tips useful. Remember, these are just a start, so once you have made some progress with these, do let me know, and let me know in the comments below what you're struggling with next, because there's so much more to this.